Welcome to our final fostering care panel conversation on centering and prioritizing youth voice. My name is Veronica Krupnick, and I am the Mentorship, Advocacy, and Peer Support Program Coordinator with CASA First, and I will be today's panel host. I'm so excited about today's conversation because as someone who works within child welfare professionally, I know that this conversation will impact daily work. I'm also incredibly grateful to be joined and to share space with my fellow lived experience advocates and leaders from across the country. The intention of these conversations is to bring awareness, empathy, and compassion back to the humans who have been impacted by the child welfare system. This collaborative project is based on the human experiences, the stories, the perspectives, and ultimately the hearts of each of our panelists. What I value most about this project is the way we've been able to show up for each other as community. We hope that you've enjoyed the conversation so far, and we would love to continue those conversations with you all. Before I introduce our panelists for today's panel, I would like to pause and say that while we share some of our personal experiences, there may be emotionally triggering or emotionally difficult experiences to hear. So we ask that you take this panel series at your own pace and to take care of yourself. In this final panel, we will share with you about what made our panelists feel supported during their time in care and what could have gone better, as well as how can we now support young people in having a voice in their own lives. Some topics we'll touch on are mental health, education, career, and much more in this conversation. And we hope that you leave this panel with some concrete steps that could support you in your own work. Today, I'm joined by 3 lived experience child welfare advocates, each of which are working tirelessly to create change within the system. So let's hear a little bit more about them and introduce our panelists. Myla Garcia grew up as the daughter of Filipino immigrants in California. She entered the foster care system at age 13 and aged out at 21. She is a first-generation college graduate and studied political science and minored in English at California State University, Fullerton. After college, she served as a Peace Corps volunteer in West Africa, and in May, Myla will graduate from Penn State Dickinson Law with a Juris Doctor degree. In law school, she was an Equal Justice Works Rural Summer Legal Fellow and worked in education equity for California Rural Legal Assistance and as an Equity and Inclusion Fellow with the Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles, where she worked with victims of domestic violence. Myla has also worked as a certified legal intern and represented foster youth in their court proceedings at her law school's Children's Advocacy Clinic. This past year, Myla has also been a member of the National Foster Youth and Alumni Policy Council. She aspires to use her law degree and work towards legal reform and service for youth in the child welfare system and communities of color. Brittney Lee experienced 17 foster homes in the span of 17 years of her childhood. Brittney's current aspiration is to utilize her growth and knowledge gained from resilience, community involvement, and employment opportunities with youth who have experienced foster care. She consistently involves herself in community conversations on child welfare and engages in opportunities where she can increase her understanding on how to best leverage her experience and to meet her goals. One of those major goals is to become more educated on the subject of racial disproportionality in the child welfare system. Brittney hopes to work from the inside to come up with simple solutions to counteract racial inequality and institutionalized structural racism that affects all youth in foster care today. Brittney has unconditional compassion in her heart to give back to the youth in the community similar to those in which she grew up in, as well as on a national and global level. Brittney wishes to be a role model and a source of support to youth experiencing foster care and to help them navigate all the ups and downs and to be the someone that Brittney needed when she was younger. Shemia Dillard is a project assistant with National Creatine focused on young mothers initiatives, juvenile justice work, and advocacy and policy. For over 10 years, Shemia has advocated for foster youth, young mothers, and girls and young women who are system involved and system impacted. Shemia has testified and spoken in front of various congressional briefings, participated in public engagement events to raise awareness of issues impacting young women and gender expansive youth, and volunteers locally on issues impacting her own community. Shemia also holds a degree in sociology and is based out of the Atlanta area. All right, well, thank you so much for being here, and thank you to our panelists, Myla, Shemia, and Brittney, for joining me in this conversation about prioritizing and centering youth voice. This is our last panel conversation for this series, and I'm really looking forward to where this conversation goes. So I want to go ahead and just get right into the questions that we have for you all. And I feel like in our other panels we've talked a lot about some overarching topics and themes that impact youth and care. And today, hopefully, we're going to get very specific about things child welfare professionals can do who are directly working with youth and care. So I want to start off the conversation around communication. Right, I think if you've heard me speak before, you've definitely heard me say how we speak to and about young people in care is really important. So I want to ask our panelists today, in regards to communication with child welfare professionals, what was most helpful for you as a young person, and what do you try to implement yourself when communicating with other young people in care?
I can start with that. Veronica, thank you again for inviting me to speak on this panel. I feel very honored. As for the question, something that I found very helpful when I was in care was when the people in my life, my CASA workers, my social workers, would speak to me they'd speak to me very candidly. They would be very frank with me, and they'd speak to me in a way that I could understand. And that's something that I've tried to implement in my work now, because oftentimes especially with attorneys who work with youth that they represent, sometimes most of the time, attorneys will end up speaking to youth in legal terms. They'll use GAL, they'll say, attorney, I represent you this way and that way. But they don't take the time to explain what these specific legal terms are, which leaves youth very confused. And being a college grad or being a law school graduate now and hoping to go into a juvenile defense and having represented foster youth in care, that's something that I definitely try to implement when I do work with youth in care, just being able to explain things to them in a way that's age appropriate, in a way that they can understand, and taking the time to say, to explain what's happening in a courtroom, what their choices could be. And I think that's something a lot of child welfare professionals could do to implement effective communication when they speak to other youth in care.
Answering your question, Veronica, I would have to say that the biggest issue that I specifically faced as a lived experience person is when being in the court system, they didn't explain a lot of things to me. A lot of court procedures were done without my knowledge. They'll say I was deprived. They would come out of the courtroom, explain to me that I was going back into the system. The biggest thing about communication is breaking down to a youth what is specifically happening. What does this mean? What are the next steps? So that youth can understand that, okay, this is why this happened, instead of leaving this gray area of why is this happening to me, not feeling safe, not feeling heard, just basically being able to, even if a person doesn't think a child will understand, at least the child, especially speaking on my experience, if I would have had that memory, somebody breaking something down to me, even if it went over my head, it would be helpful to at least know that, you know what, they tried to tell me and I remember I didn't understand. And even with that being said, realize that you don't know what these legal terms are or what these policies are, and help them understand and guide them and walk them through it.
I definitely want to second that, especially towards the second part of this question where it said, what do you try to implement yourself when communicating with other young people in care? Just in my experience, not necessarily of youth in care, but youth who are very close, you know, on the precipice of being involved in the child welfare system. I worked at a family homeless shelter for about 3 years in the youth program. And these are youth who have been through some of the same things I've been through in 17 years of foster care, just experiencing homelessness with their families. So just in that instance, like I would try to just, like you said, give it to them straight and give them the benefit of the doubt around what you think they can understand. Because I think what happens with youth a lot is that they don't always know, because they don't always have examples of what it looks like to communicate clearly, you know, quote unquote, maturely, or whatever that looks like. So we don't think they have it in them sometimes. But as youth myself, back in the day when I cognitively understood things that I didn't know how to communicate about, I would be able to understand that if it was communicated to me, but I just wasn't given that benefit of the doubt. So I try to treat these youth like, not like adults, but as youth who have been through things and have the capacity to understand those things, or you know, and whatnot. So yeah, definitely giving it to them straight, being as candid as possible, and then explaining why a certain thing did or didn't happen, you know, explaining who failed, like hold the people in the child's life accountable, like explain, like, you know, and I think that will help not only the youth, but help them build relationships that are gonna make it meaningful for the youth to feel safe and secure, and at least have some support in their life, like they say, like one adult makes a difference. So as far as like what was helpful for me as a young person, exactly that, like being given that benefit of the doubt and being talked to like I could understand complex issues, because I was going through complex issues my whole childhood. So that was, I think what was most helpful would have been that, and was that when I got it. But I often got a lot more examples of like what wasn't helpful. So I don't really know, honestly, how to name what was most helpful, because I don't remember enough being helpful. So that's like what we're wanting to change here.
Yes, thank you for your answers. I think that statement in and of itself, Brittney, was powerful, right? There wasn't enough helpful for you to even bring that into like the conversation. So there's definitely some gaps there. Yeah, I think that clear, consistent communication is huge, which all three of you touched on. And Shemia saying, you know, guiding you through the system, and explaining like who's who too as well, not just what's happening. But I think that is something that many young people face, is the encounter with a whole slew of people, but no one really is explaining like the difference between a CASA and a social worker, or what is a GAL versus a youth attorney, right? Everyone has their own roles and they know that, but the youth, I think a lot of times, and in my personal experience, everyone was a social worker, right? That's just kind of like everyone is a social worker. It's not always the case. So, you know, education is power, and we need to give that back to our young people. And speaking of lots of people coming in and out of youth lives, if there's one thing we could probably all agree on, is entering into the foster care system as a kid, as a youth, is traumatic, and there's a lot going on, and there's a lot of unknown. So that leads us into our second question: is, given the turbulence of entering and being in foster care, how does this impact a young person's sense of safety and trust? And then part 2 is, what can child welfare professionals do to support youth in being and feeling safe?
I would just jump in and say that there is a lot of changes around the foster care system, and being in it, like it says, like there's a lot of turbulence. So around that, like how that impacted my sense of safety and trust, like largely just like one example, like as I've been getting older and reflecting on my time in care, it's like mind-boggling how I wasn't even allowed access to the fridge or to the cupboards. Like I'd have lived somewhere for like a while and then still wouldn't even know where like they keep like plates, just because I wouldn't be allowed access to like things. And that, I couldn't help but understand, especially because it was never explained clearly why. I couldn't help but like boil it down to like, okay, they don't trust me. And so in turn, of course, I don't trust them. And so like that, just like the stipulations of different homes, like just, and how each one is so different. So say like a lot of Black and brown youth that tend to stay in the systems longer, like, me being in 17 years, like years and years of just not being trusted, like how does that show up later in my relationships with other people? Like, yay, I just get to find that out on my own. Like, it's not fun. And I feel for a lot of my peers and fellow advocates who can relate. And then as far as like safety, I think because of the types of relationships that are formed or aren't formed in homes, it is hard to feel safe, especially when on the basis of the relationship, you don't feel trusted, when you don't trust in turn, because it doesn't feel like they're prioritizing you as like keeping you safe, and it feels like safety is something that you should just know, like it's your fault, like, you know what I mean? Like if you do something unsafe in the home by accident, the response is often like, in my experience, like, yeah, you're yelled at, you're in trouble. Like if I drop a bowl on accident and break it because I'm clumsy, like I'm not being wrapped around in like, hey, like don't go near those shards because I don't want you to get cut. It's more like, what's wrong with you and why did you do that? And so it's just like all around the lack of like effort in a lot of homes, whether that's adoptive or fostering, because sometimes there's this complex of like, okay, I have you in my home, I'm feeding you, you have a bed, that's all I need to do. There's this complex of like that, like that's enough. I think that impacts a lot of safety and trust. So that was a bit of a lot, but what I think as far as like the second part of the question, like what child welfare professionals can do, as much as possible, stability. I think the movement towards heavily prioritizing reunification and kinship care, I think that can be great. As long as there's like consistent checking in, like more effort of like developing a sense of trust and safety between the professionals in the child's life that have control over where they go and all these things. There's a lot of things that change, so just a lot of as much consistency and support and communication with the child on a candid level, referring back to the last question, I think is helpful.
I would have to say in my experience, I was in foster care towards like teenage years all the way until I was, it's not emancipated, but until I aged out. And I was also dually system involved. I was also a juvenile justice youth. And later down the line, I was also a foster youth and a teen parent. So a lot of safety and trust was broken. Make a long story short, I actually was separated from my son during his younger years. And that did a lot. Before that even happened, I had a lot of safety and trust issues being in foster care or in the system, because people would tell you one thing and do another. And it goes back to what we were talking about with communication. Explain to me and tell me what's going on and why this is going on. I didn't have a path to follow. It was one day, oh, you can't be in this home anymore. I didn't know that it was temporary and you couldn't find me shelter. So I'm in this house with these younger children. And then 5 days later, you're moving me to a group home because that wasn't an appropriate place. Nobody said that. I thought I did something wrong. It was always something, this is my fault. I did something, maybe kind of like Brittney said, maybe I broke the bowl. Maybe that's why they got rid of me. When in essence, I wasn't supposed to be there anyway, but no one told me. So how would I know? So you move through these systems always thinking that's I would like to say that youth probably feel like it's their fault. And a lot of the times it's not their fault. If your parents had an issue and you were taken from the home, it's not the youth's fault. Communicate that with them. Let them know, hey, this is what's going on. This is why this is happening. And if the youth like me was acting out, understand that this is still a child, just like it would be any other normal child in a home that would act out, that might get involved with a gang, that might get involved with, I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but we know children will be children, especially in their teen years. So when you're a foster youth or system involved youth, you're looked at different, like, oh, you're just out of control. I didn't ask to come here and be in this system. And it's hard for me because I just went from this house to this group home to this institution, and nobody's explaining anything and nobody's taking any time, or you get, you fall through the cracks. Depending on if you are one of those model system involved youth, you don't get the same services. You don't get that teen work program job in the summer. You don't get that scholarship because you didn't follow these tight ropes, or you weren't put in the same home as them, or maybe you have a mental disorder, so you're not going to behave like them. I'm not going to be modeled because I'm a human being. And I believe getting down to the root of what's the youth's issue would help a lot, and communicating with them would help essentially a lot with them trusting and feeling safe instead of just doing things. Yeah, that's my piece.
I think what a lot of child welfare professionals neglect to remember when they speak to foster youth is that we are all traumatized. We were all taken from our homes in some way, shape, or form and put into another home. And we all react to that in different ways. We all experience trauma in different ways, and we all react to it very differently. Some of us will act out, some of us will not speak at all. And a lot of child welfare professionals may see the way we act and reduce us down to a file number, a youth number, something that they have to check. They ask a couple questions and then they check that off their list, and then they're done with us until the next month that they have to speak to us. And I think that's very harmful because it does affect the way that that we perceive safety and trust within the child welfare system. I think it's important for child welfare professionals who will be in the lives of these youth to take the time to build that relationship. And I think that's one of the things that I appreciated, at least of my CASA. She saw me as a youth. She met me when I was 13, 14. I didn't want to speak to her. I didn't want to speak to anybody because I didn't understand what was happening. And she would ask me things very slowly. It started as like a really short initial meeting. And she would ask things like, would you like this bag of chips? Would it be okay if I gave you a hug, like little things like this, like that, that at least had me have some control over what was happening. She didn't just push me one way or another. And I think that's what a lot of child welfare professionals could do to improve their relationships and improve the feelings of safety and trust among the youth in their care.
Thank you for that. Yeah, the power of choice is huge. Even in like little conversation pieces. Myla, I had a CASA as well in my time in care, and it was simple as asking like what game would she like me to bring the next time she visited me, right? Right, giving little choices and giving some of that autonomy back to young people is huge. And it goes a lot further than I think people give it credit for. I also think, you know, Brittney and Shemia both kind of touched on this a little bit, is, right, foster care is a strange place to be as a young person. This is the one place where kids are bad or labeled bad or troubled until they prove themselves to be good, or in Shemia's words, a model system involved youth. Right, the reaction to breaking the bowl is so much more intense. You do that in your own home now, and you don't have a fear of losing your housing. But as a young person in care, that fear is real, right? That rejection or it is very real and can definitely affect people's ability to feel safe and to trust. And so I just want to say thank you to all three of you for sharing some really important points and personal experiences that really highlight that. Speaking of kind of this categorizing of, you know, good or bad young people in care, I think something we often see with youth who are labeled as troubled or bad kids is over medication. So I want to kind of shift our conversation to talk about that a little bit. So in your personal and professional experience, what do you see as the connection between youth and care and medication? And what can we do better to support youth who need mental health resources?
Thank you, Shemia. We were ready. I love that. So this is something I'm super passionate about, especially, as it's asking specifically, like in my personal experience. I see a lot of connections to things coming out of school with my ethnic, gender, and labor studies degree. I see a lot of connections between race, gender, and class, and a lot of issues and around medication. It's not surprising to have gotten older and then researched that a lot of like the most marginalized of our community, disabled youth and Black and brown youth, like disabled Black and brown, like all these intersections, these kids get it really hard sometimes. And I was diagnosed with ADHD, it didn't even feel like a year into beginning preschool. I remember just blurry little kid mind, like my teacher telling my foster parents, like, she might have ADHD. And I'm like, but you don't have a degree for this. Like, I mean, maybe they did, but it's frustrating because I see a pattern of non-professionals getting this input in, and that being like the end all be all. And I should not have been on 100 milligrams a day at 4 years old, 2 in the morning, 2 at school in the afternoon before lunch, and then 2 before bed. You know what I mean? Like, it was a lot, and it absolutely altered my body, the way my brain works at a very young age. And that's scary. Like, I have no idea what future things might come from having been on ADHD medicine for almost 20 years on high dosages, because there was a lot of miseducation, around ADHD, especially when I entered like in the early or late 90s, early 2000s. There were my foster parents, of the longest ones that I were in, they were highly ignorant, totally thought anything with sugar in it, juice, cupcakes, like all of that, like was cut out. Like I didn't get any of that. Like I was lucky to get a handful of candy on Halloween. I was lucky to get more of a slice of my own birthday cake on my birthday, because there was just all this heavy miseducation around ADHD, learning disabilities, and disabilities in general. I'm pretty sure, I'm going to find out, but I'm pretty sure I'm misdiagnosed autistic. I'm paying attention like for the past 6 months, and I mask a lot, as young girls often do, and we're often left in the dust when it comes to actual correct diagnosis that could have altered the way we learned, could have altered the way we were successful in school or in the home, you know what I mean? So I see a huge connection, and I could talk about it forever. But to go ahead to the second question, what can we do better to support youth? The first question we answered around communication, that's a huge and great basis, I think, for getting there. I think once we start to communicate with youth, ask them, why do you always cover your ears just when we flush the toilet? Or like, why does the loud TV bother you sometimes? Or those lights, like, why do those always give you headaches? You know what I mean? Like, there's sensory issues. And when you have trauma, those tend to just come with PTSD. And it's just all this mixed up ball. And we need a lot of love and attention and correct diagnosis and care put into that. But because of where our medical system is in the country in general, not a lot of people are getting that anyways, unfortunately. So I think just being the advocates that youth need, I think that can be great. And that's really getting to know them. And that starts with, like you guys said, giving small choices, building trust, one step at a time, to see where they're at, to get those questions answered, to teach them how to communicate their mental health needs, and so much more. So I think that's a big stepping stone, is just we need to learn how to build real trauma-informed relationships with youth.
Thank you for that, Brittney. I definitely resonate with a lot of that. I was actually diagnosed with ADHD before I entered foster care. I came into foster care when I was like a teen, early teens. So I hadn't been medicated for a little while, but as soon as I got into care and they start doing their routine evaluations with people that you don't know, it's like, oh yeah, she has this. And then as I started to act out, because I was a teen that was taken out of my home and nobody's explaining to me, where am I about to go? What is the trajectory? I was the behavioral one. And I can admit that. I remember feeling scared and nervous, and I went through a lot of placements. I'll be nice and say 20 or more, because I was a teen. So therefore I went from homes, temporary placements, group homes, facilities, juvenile facilities. I bounced around a lot, and that was the quickest Band-Aid. Like, I feel like, speaking for myself, but for youth, in this situations, like, oh, here's a diagnosis, here's a Band-Aid, here's a fix for it. And my biggest issue in what I'm frustrated about is that I went through a lot of different psychiatrists and psychologists. So nobody was, I'm at a loss for words. Nobody was consistent. I saw different therapists, so I could never trust what anybody was saying. And I didn't know, I feared my own body. I feared my own mental stability, because you're telling me this, but I'm not understanding it. And I already don't have anybody. I'm by myself. So I think when it comes, the connection between medicine and system involved youth is quick Band-Aid. If you're acting out, if you have an issue, give them a pill. And it really sucks. I really feel as though there should be some advocacy around policies changing for alternative medicine, especially when it comes to being approved by Medicaid. Maybe there needs to be swim therapy, horse therapy, pet therapy. Maybe instead of college youth or even people that just want to volunteer, how about you get assigned a youth after you've had your background checked, of course. But how about you do that and spend a little time with youth? Because I understand that there's a lot of system involved youth, but there's a lot of people on earth. And if you give that 1 or 2 hours, maybe a week, what change could that make where you're not shoving artificial synthetic things down their throat? Maybe you can see some type of changes. Maybe, you know, that horse ride or that outdoor therapy for the end of that month or for the summer could help release them back and help ground them. And especially if they're people of color, a lot of people's traditions have been taken from them, and who knows, they might be able to be back into connection with what their spirit believes they should be doing. It's like Brittney said, I can go on and on, but I really feel that a Band-Aid shouldn't be given. I feel like there should be more consistency with whoever the professionals are that are diagnosing them, so that they're getting the correct diagnosis, as well as just finding some type of alternative, whether it be physically, whether it be with a person or even with an animal, just something different besides synthetics.
I definitely agree with both Shemia and Brittney on this. When it comes to therapy, when I was in care, I was made to see a therapist for the same therapist for a number of years, but it wasn't helpful. And when I would say it wasn't helpful, it didn't matter. So I was made to see the same person week after week with no progress. And instead of listening to me and at least switching to another person, I was made to see the same person that just wasn't helpful, who would talk about their family and their life instead of trying to build a relationship with me and trying to sort through my trauma. Instead, I got to listen to my therapist talk about her life. And of course, that's not helpful. And I see this a lot now, having represented youth in care. Oftentimes, youth need an attorney in the room. They need someone in the courtroom to say and echo the child's voice, saying, we don't want this therapist. These meds are not helping, because like Shemia said, it's just a Band-Aid. Oftentimes there are youth in care who are in shelters and whatnot, and they're being given a whole host of medication, so much medication, and it doesn't make sense. And oftentimes they haven't seen a psychiatrist in 5 years, 10 years to at least keep that medication updated. They're still taking the same medication as they were decades ago. And I think that's something that's very, very harmful, that a lot of child welfare professionals could improve upon, just letting that child, that teen, have their voice and have that choice when it comes to mental health care. Just simply asking, is this working? Are these meds working? And even when, and in the event that it's not, having the ability to change that. And yeah, I think centering the child's voice in this would be very beneficial.
Yes, absolutely. I have definitely seen personally and professionally this happen so often, where a room full of adults tend to make the decisions for a young person. And the thing is each of those adults that made that decisions, they get to go home to their own lives, right? But the life whose decisions they're making, like for another person, has to live with that, that their life is altered. And when they're relying on medications like this, right, sometimes that's a really hard thing to come back from, because you're really, like, altering your body. And I think a powerful statement that Shemia said was, having the feeling of not trusting your own body, right? We've taken away so much from young people. We've even taken a trust of their own mind and their own sense of their being, their body. And I think that hurts to hear, because I know so many, I know that Shemia is not alone in that statement. Yeah, and I think, I think we've heard a few themes come out of this, like communication, consistency, trust, building relationships. Those are all huge. Another thing that I think to come out of your statements as well is the need for expanding what we see mental health resources as. It tends to be very boxed in with either therapy or medication. But there's so much more out there. I know plenty of people who've benefited from things like equine therapy, right? It has nothing to do with people, or cultural connections. I know that was brought up as well. So that expansion, but ultimately you don't ever get to figuring out what's going to work for youth until you communicate with the youth, until you hear their voice and trust them. Trust them to know themselves and their lives. And I don't think there's enough trust going the other way either, right? From professionals to youth. And so one thing we've talked about in our own conversations outside of this recording has been sometimes this external pressure from child welfare professionals or people in youth lives to meet this version of success. And it's often not the youth version of success. So I want to talk about that a little bit of how can child welfare professionals help young people to meet their own definition and vision of success?
I can start with this one. I think what a lot of child welfare professionals need to realize is that success is different for every person. For them, it was being a social worker or being a caseworker. That's their definition of success. And for youth, oftentimes we're pushed into wanting, or we're pushed into trying to be something that we know we don't want to be. As for myself, I was told since I entered care, you should college. I didn't have an option to even think about any other types of careers, any other types of vocational work. And it led me to feeling like unless I went to college, these people wouldn't be in my support system. These people wouldn't support me. And because I did go to college and later on went on to law school, I've noticed throughout that time that child welfare professionals tend to see me as the one that did the thing. But I wasn't really given the choice to be anything else. And when this is pushed on other youth who do not want to go to college, who want to do the military or who want to join a vocational career, they don't know that they want to do these other things because they're not exposed to it. And having represented youth in care, I've noticed, which made me look back on my life and recognize the privilege that I had. Oftentimes judges and attorneys will see youth who pursue college or their definition of success as being more worthy of saying, hey, I know this person that could get you this scholarship. Hey, I know somebody you should get in touch with. Hey, I have all these things for you. But when it comes to youth who are not their definition of success or not their definition of succeeding, who are still trying to find their identity, their way in life, who are getting in trouble at school or with the juvenile justice system, they don't offer the same kind of, or what I've seen, the same kind of care isn't given that way. It's almost as if youth who aren't fitting their definition of success are being written off. And I think that's absolutely awful. So I think it's very important for youth to have that choice when it comes to what they want to do when they age out, what they want to do once they're out of care. And I think they should be supported wholeheartedly in their endeavors. And I think that's something that's missing in a lot of systems.
I really think that it's, I noticed that when social workers and professionals in the system write these case plans and things of that nature, it's just easy to throw in there. Just like popping a pill is easy to just, put a Band-Aid on it. Oh, go to college. I don't think there's much thought put into it. And we're back at the first topic. It's communication. Once again, you have to get to know the youth or the placement, whether it's the foster home or the probation officer, the mentor. Someone has to touch the youth in order to know where they are and how to engage them and bring them closer to their dream, because even people in homes outside of the system, sometimes the adults' version of success gets projected onto children. And I think it's an issue system-wide or just, in general when it comes to children. I really agree with Myla when she said exposure. That's something that I held in my head. The system that I was in, I don't know if it was because of my behavior, but what I've noticed out of the majority of us that were in the county that I was in, we didn't go to the teen youth program, but right outside the city, the big city that we were near, they went to summer youth programs. They had programs that they had access, they had exposure, they had things that we did not, because the county that we were from it was like it was a more well-to-do county. So we were almost invisible, like we shouldn't be there anyway. That's the problem. Like, communicate, I don't want to say make it a big deal, but bring light to it. People, I noticed a lot of companies as I've worked as an adult, they always want to volunteer within the community. Start with the youth within the system, whether it's foster care or juvenile justice. Give people exposure. Let them know that, hey, I did, but this was when I was aging out of care. I remember the department store, I think Macy's, they had an IT day, and they literally chose some of us to actually do a day in the IT department. I didn't know what IT was back then. That literally gave me an insight on something I never knew what it was. I even joke with friends and just people that I come in passing. I didn't know that you could be I'm gonna say this wrong, guys, but hey, I'm gonna try. An expat teacher. You can live abroad, they actually kind of pay for house. I would have loved to teach English as a second language in another country, but nobody told me. We even had a thought of where we were gonna be traveling, basically work off the cruise ships. Because coming out of care, we didn't necessarily have any housing. But these are the things that people don't expose you to. And what ends up happening is you get thrown into this box that doesn't necessarily fit you. So I would really implore people to get to know their youth and push them towards their goals and their dreams and give them access and exposure.
Yes, I agree with a lot of you guys' points that you guys made. As far as some of the things that I mentioned, in preparation for this today, I was kind of joking that the foster home that I was in the longest, 12 years out of the 17, my mom was Filipina, and I just got pushed with what she wanted her own biological kids to already do. So what she wanted for them, she wanted for me, and it wasn't a question. It was never do you want to do something else? Or what are you interested in? Or what programs can we get you in? It was pretty much just like everything kind of felt forced. Like, and some things I'm not mad at that, because sometimes you do have to make your kids follow through and do stuff. I get that. But other times it's just like, I'm not coming into this with a mindset of like, I chose and wanted to be here. So I just didn't always have a good time at some things. Like I did have some opportunity, like to go to like, I got to go to like a Girl Scout camp and be like a counselor in training, because I was like a little bit older at that time, like 15 or 14. For 2 weeks, you know, counselor in training with these other like 14, 15, 16-year-olds, being responsible for other little girls at the camp. And I just was bullied the whole time. And nobody asked, you know, how was it? Nobody asked, like, would you want to go again? Like, if I did like it, there was just no follow-up. So it just all around, sometimes any of the opportunities that I was given, it didn't feel like anyone cared or that it mattered. Like I was in choir for like years. Like I have always had interest in like potentially becoming a singer maybe, but that was never like cared for, you know what I mean? Like, I mean, they were Filipino, so they love me. They love some karaoke. Like anytime a guest is over, we're singing. And I think that like honed my skills. So there, like I said, there's things, there's silver linings, there's things I'm grateful for, but it just like, it's okay. It's like, okay, we have guests and you're making me sing karaoke for them, you know, at 7, 8 years old. It's cute. I'm cute. Like, but then you never go to my choir concerts, or you just literally drop me off and then pick me up when it's over. Like, why am I doing this? Like, well, you know what I mean? So again, like just communication with the youth, actually wanting to build a relationship, having in trauma-informed care, and like how that can connect to youth interacting with other youth, or building relationships. Like I know a lot of us said, I think prior to this in preparation, we all kind of agreed like sports wasn't an option, or like we just weren't asked, or like maybe we were told we don't want to pay for that, or we don't want to buy you those shoes that you need for that sport. You know, it's just like, it was a lack of care around it. So that gave me a lack of care. And so I just didn't really have a lot of clear ideas for what I wanted in my life and like what success looked like for me, because it didn't seem like it was something that anyone cared about, unfortunately. So eventually, like, I mean, I did go through and get some degrees. I beat some statistics, but I'm still wanting to advocate for the youth that don't know what they're doing, or know what they want and they're not supported. So I think, again, just emphasizing meaningful communication, whether that means taking classes around trauma-informed care, peer, like giving youth opportunities to be in peer groups outside of school and outside of daycare. You know what I mean? So just really giving them access, like you said, Shemia, and opportunity and options.
Veronica, might I add something?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Myla and Brittney. And I really feel bad that I left this part out, but when it comes to success and when it comes to a very marginalized group, even within the system, are parenting teens. And I say that because I'm speaking from experience. I was not allowed to get a job. I had a baby at the age of, I was 15 and pregnant, 16 when I had him, and I tried to get a job at the local grocery store, and I was told that, no, you need to go to school. Mind you, make a long story short, I still ended up getting my GED, but I wasn't allowed to provide for my child. And then I was told, once things went down the line with my son, I was told that, oh, the reason why we're depriving him or making him separating you, putting him into the system, separating him from you, is because basically the foster parent will get paid more if they have money for both of you guys. But the issue was, what if you would have let me get a job so I can provide for him and we can work our way out of the system? And once we went to court and we were ultimately separated, I kept my rights, but we separated through placement. They told me that, oh, you are in the system you receive assistance, so that's not actually taking care of him. And to find out years later that there was a lot of people, depending on the system, whether it be any type of welfare from housing choice or Section 8, food stamps, it was really they chose to ultimately separate me and my son purposely. I felt like it was purposely done because that was literally the excuse that was given. So I just wanted to add that when it comes to success, make sure that professionals should make sure that their parenting youth are able to line up with their responsibilities. Like no parent cannot have a job and take care of a child. So how could you expect or take that option away from them?
Thank you, Shemia, for adding that, and Brittney and Myla for your responses. To keep it short, what I really got from each of you is that, you know, youth in care, especially youth transitioning out of care, aging out, right? They deserve to be excited about their future. They deserve to have their interests, their passions taken into account and cultivated into something that they want to do, not a door they're being pushed through. And I think so many young people in care are being pushed through a door that they don't see themselves in. And then, right, we put so much emphasis on college and higher education, which is great if that's what you're passionate about. But so often the dangerous part about that is we categorize youth in care of you either went to college and you're successful now, or you didn't go to college and you're a failure, right? I think we all know the 97% don't go to higher education and 3% do, right? That's a common stat that I think all of us know. But the dangerous part about that is that all of messages are internalized, right? When we categorize success and failure, we take those messages in. And then we're surprised that more, youth in care, alumni of care aren't finding their version of success. Well, everything you've told them is with them. So I think that's what I really got. And then one thing I really wanted to circle back around was something that Myla was speaking about with the example of people's perception of a young person impacting decision making, right? Their perception of whether a young person is on the right path or on a good path versus a youth who the word that's often used is troubled, right? They're troubled, they're going down the wrong path, they're a dangerous path, and just kind of how people's perceptions and bias play a role in decision making, because it does, and that's something I think we need to talk about more. So I really want to speak on that with our next question, which is, in your experience, how can personal bias and a lack of equity impact decision making and ultimately alter a young person's life?
I think just to, well, first I want to say, Veronica, thank you for transitioning so smoothly every time and wrapping up what you got from us. It's always really insightful. But yeah, I think that just kind of like what Shemia and Myla were saying last time, for the last question specifically, young people don't often have access. It's not equitable access. And I think that around this question, it's just such a nice open-ended question, because there's so many things I think that there's so many ways I think that personal bias impacts decision-making around the child welfare system. I think the origins of the child welfare system in America highlight that, and a lot of those elements have become more subtle and more micro, so to speak, but they're definitely, they pile up to make a really messy system, I don't even want to say broken, because it's it's honestly still doing the dark deeds that it was made to do, which is separate families that people thought that, you know, in a paternalistic way, these Black and brown mothers, or, you know, back in the day, even the Irish were seen as Black, like these poor immigrant mothers, or whatever they are, or formerly slave mother, like wherever you were at. It was terrible. And I think that some of those things still affect the child welfare system today. A lot of the child welfare system like is rooted in colonialism and capitalism, which are extremely linked. When we're talking about how youth and care connect to medication, there's some really dark parts of those that intersection. Especially just like around how people have just admitted, like, it makes youth easier and docile to manage, or easier to manage and more docile. And I think that's this paternalistic mindset that has affected a lot of homes who are targeted by the child welfare system, by CPS, that develops this like level of distrust between the communities and the state, and the people that are hired or claim to be helping, the social workers, the cops, you know what I mean? So I think these absolutely, I mean, no one makes really like unbiased decisions in this industry, so to speak. Like, I think there's always something altering their lens, whether that's white supremacy, colonialism, capitalism. We've all been programmed, and there's just ways we can talk through things, name what they are, and really hold ourselves accountable and unlearn actively in and outside of our professional lives for the better of these young people. Like, they're deserving of that and so much more, as we all are. And so that's just what I think around that. Like, I think bias absolutely leads to lack of equity, and I could go on and on, but I want to give everyone a chance to speak. Yeah.
I don't know how you come behind that, Brittney. Like, I really, really agree with what you said. Like, yes, hands down. So I will stick to my personal experience, but I'm gonna add to what you said when it comes to parenting youth. I feel like the biases that you were fast, you were a bad girl, you were like not ladylike, like this shouldn't happen. All those judgments come down the pipeline, and I have lived it. How can it impact someone's life? I can speak from my own. I was separated from my son because of people's personal biases. I was shackled probably at like 16. I was pregnant in the, I forgot why I was locked up at the time. And the court advocate, it was something like a juvenile panel. So like citizens within the community were sitting there. And as I stated before, I was in this well-to-do county. They said girls like me should have to pay back the system. I don't know who girls like me are. I don't, because I was a child. I may have made it a grown-up decision. It's not a mistake, but why should I pay back the system? Because I'm a child. Because if I was at home, I wouldn't pay back my parents for having the baby. They would either assist me or they would send me on my way. And of course, with the state, of course, they weren't going to send me on my way. When it comes to parenting youth, I feel like they should be, there shouldn't be shame behind it. Once the child is here, you should help support the parent and the mother. I mean, the parent and the baby, so that we don't have this generational system involved youth, you know, systems being ready to take the child from the parents just to keep a generational thing going. But I have to go back to what Brittney said. It's kind of doing what it was designed to do anyway. So I it's hard for me to put that into words, but I would really like for social workers and system involved people to not use their own judgments on how they think things should be, and just support youth so that they can get to where they need to be.
Thank you, Brittney and Shemia. I want to highlight a couple of points that both of you had made. Bias is extremely harmful. As Brittney had mentioned, foster care, child welfare system, all of that is rooted in colonialism, white supremacy. And when you take a system that is predominantly people of color, there's a lot of Black and brown babies in foster care, Black and brown children in foster care. And most social workers, most people who are in positions of power, they are white. There's no dancing around that. And I've seen a lot of bias working on the legal side of the foster care system. And a lot of it can stem from very innocent thoughts. For example, if you have a client that speaks, a child that speaks another language than you, and you have to hire an interpreter, and you think, oh, I kind of want to go home early today. I'm just going to rush through this translated call. What you have next is a youth who only speaks a different language, who doesn't speak English, who gets this the shortened version of what their rights are. And that stems from something, like I said, as innocent as, I just want to go home early today. Another thing that I've seen, a lot of other cultures tend to have multi-generational households. We tend to have parents, grandparents, and cousins living in a house, and it's all normal, it's all fine. But I've seen mothers get their children taken away because there's too many people in one home. There's too many children sleeping in one room. And that's extremely harmful, because then you're criminalizing nothing. The parents did nothing wrong. They're just living in a multi-generational household. And that stems from the people in power thinking, oh, or not realizing that this is what other cultures do. And other examples I've seen, so now I work at a public defender's agency, and oftentimes attorneys, prosecutors, a lot of these people in charge will hear words that they've never heard, different cultures speaking, using slang, and they take that and they criminalize these people for what they said, even though they don't understand it. For example, I've seen examples on the internet where white nurses will say, oh, client called me bro, child called me fam, disrespectful, should stay in care for more than 30 days, or whatever it is. And this is extremely harmful, because then you're not taking into account someone's culture. You're not taking into account how someone grew up. Instead, you're imposing your version of the world, which ends up being predominantly white, more affluent modes of thinking, and applying it to something that you just don't know about. And I think what a lot of child welfare professionals could do, and it is really hard, you need to take a step back often, every day, whatever it is, and think, how am I affecting these children's lives? How is something I'm doing helping? Or how could this action potentially hurt somebody? And there is a lot of research around the foster care to prison pipeline. A lot of times these youth who are misunderstood, who are labeled as not fitting people's definitions of success, they end up being involved in the criminal justice system, and it becomes a cycle of youth in care being now adults in the criminal justice system. And that stems all from bias. And it just takes, it's going to be hard, but it takes nothing to just, at the end of the day, reflect back on your life and see how your way of thinking, your bias could play into the work that you do. So that's the advice I would give to child welfare professionals on bias and equity.
Yeah, whew. All three of you provided a lot, and I think spoke to the impact of bias kind of at all levels, right? Systemically to personal experience, as Shemia shared with us. And thank you for sharing your personal experience. I know that's not always easy. But yeah, just kind of seeing like we can talk about bias and the overarching, or we can be super specific and speak about like, right, how a human's life has been altered, changed. And I hope that this conversation and really all of the conversations we've had with alumni of CARE really does ignite like people wanting to listen more effectively, people taking the time to figure out when to step back and step up, taking the time to get to know young people as humans, not another notebook. And I think that we see that so often, right? Because many of us, and including myself, right, we go to work every day. We work within child welfare. It's a job. We do get paid for it. We put in the hours. And I think sometimes when you get so wrapped in the job, you forget that these are people. These are humans. Their lives are going to be altered based on your decisions or your lack of decision or action. And so I really hope that this just like ignites that fire back in people to think of this more as a job, right? That you're in a position to truly make a difference in a human's life, and in some cases, multiple humans' lives for our parenting teens. And just taking in the gravity and the responsibility of that, I think it is really important. So I want to lead us into our last question, because we've definitely gone and touched on super important topics. And I'm thankful for the three of you being here to take us through this conversation. I couldn't think of three better people to do it. But I do want to end on a note of hope, as I have in every other panel. And so I'd like to turn it to each of you to share, like, what is your hope and vision for the future in regards to child welfare and also centering youth voice?
Well, ultimately, I want to dream big. I want to hope big. I want to see big. So I want to see the dismantlement of the child welfare system. I want to see it demolished and destructed. And I would hope to see it replaced with something better fitting that actually comes from youth voice, whether it be current youth that are in the system or previous. And this system actually structured to where this could help people go further, because as we know, things do happen. Someone might be a quote unquote orphan and have to go into the system, but should they come out more traumatic than they went in? No. So I would like for the system to just be built by basically foster youth, the system involve youth.
Beautifully said. Absolutely. I'm for the abolishment of this system, especially because of its roots. So like in turn of a child welfare system as we know it, my hope is to either return to / and or reimagine what it looks like for child welfare to be intrinsically connected to community welfare, because they are one and the same. You know, if you're pushing these youth out onto the street and they're aging out and becoming homeless, homelessness leads to being vulnerable to certain substance abuses, and so many things can come from that. You know, we're complaining about crime rates and all of this, but doing nothing to the root of the issues, which is broken homes, broken families, separated children, and trauma often. I think, especially when we talk about mental health, I think if we acknowledge, one, educate community and society around mental health and medication, and like mental health and like physical health and all of that, I think those are a lot of the roots we have. Like I think those are a lot of the roots for the issues of like why youth enter care anyways, or at least why they say we do. I think finding a family that's troubled, whether that's a single mom and child, or young parents, or anyone who's vulnerable, like finding those families before they're separated, or as they would otherwise, you know, be involved in the child welfare system. Instead, there's a wraparound program, not just for the child outside of the home, but in the home with the parents, get the parents' mental health like resources, get them substance abuse, rehabilitation, you know, educate them on the socioeconomic issues that came to them even being in the system. Like personally, me, my parents, and our whole story, my biological parents, and our whole story was a direct, I think, indirect but direct effect on the war on drugs, which, like, if I had more time, I would explain why that it directly related to a lot of youth entering care who shouldn't have or didn't need to. My dad was affected by the over masculinization of Black men by claiming Crip and shooting people and being in and out of jail at a very young age. My mom got pregnant with me when she was 16. There's a lot of lack of education around how to have safe sex, and I could have been avoided, which, like, I'm glad I'm not, because I've done a lot of great things and I love like who I have in my life. But it's just, you know, like, but I wouldn't have had to been through all I had to be through to get here. You know what I mean? So it's just like, when we're talking about the future, I think it really does start in community. It starts in family. We've heavily neglected that for centuries, especially in this country, if not from the beginning of it, at least the beginning of its colonization. So I think that's my hope, is just focusing back on community, learning to communicate, and making easy access to plethora of types of education that would help avoid some of the issues that lead to the trauma and generational cycles that a lot of us have, and why we were in care. So.
Thank you, both of you. I definitely agree with your hopes for the system. From the moment that I wanted to be a child advocate, I've always hoped for the child welfare system to, it kind of mirrors Shemia's hopes. I want there to be a world where this job doesn't exist, where I don't have to be a child advocate, where I don't have to be a lawyer for children. I just want the system to work as well as it should work, as well as youth deserve. And as for foster youth, my hope for youth within the system, I hope we all find our peace. I hope we're all able to heal from the trauma that is foster care, and that we end up listening to our own voices and being able to achieve our versions of success, whatever it may be.
I'm not going to summarize at all because I think what each of you said was beautiful. And, you know, I encourage people to rewatch that last part again and again and again. And what I will say is, I hear your vision, I see your vision, and I'm right there with you in that vision. Yeah, so I want to end this by saying I am so thankful to have had this conversation. I feel like even I grew in this conversation. I love sharing space and being in community with each of you. So thank you so much for sharing your personal wisdom, your professional experiences, all of the above with me, and also, you know, with the child welfare community. I think it's conversations like this that really show, you know, what can be done right now today. So I just want to say thank you, and I'm going to go ahead and end it here. Thank you so much for joining us for our final panel conversation on centering and prioritizing youth voice. I hope something from today's conversation resonated with you and that you're able to take a few concrete action steps into your own work. I want to say thank you to Myla, Brittney, and Shemia for sharing their experiences, both personal and professional, and ultimately their vulnerability. I also want to say a big thank you to CASA First, or the court-appointed special advocates in the 1st Judicial District, based out of Santa Fe, New Mexico, for supporting this project, as well as supporting myself to get through this project. We are a small team, but we do a lot, and I have so much gratitude for our team. If you haven't already, all 5 conversations that we've hosted on lived experience and advocacy, Indigenous youth and child welfare, the foster care to prison pipeline, long-term healing and well-being, and now youth voice. All 5 of these conversations are now available on our YouTube channel, and I highly recommend that you go and check that out. Also, if you haven't followed us on social media, I will drop all of the links below in the description, and you can keep up to date with us on what we're doing and what we'll be doing in the future. Again, thank you so much, and I hope these panel conversations have been helpful. Thank you.